straight into it. We're going to be using our old faithful Google Earth as we zoom around all parts of California and definitely 1,000 miles from LA, because that is the true story of California water. I usually start with that big, it's getting boring, the overview of planet Earth. But today I thought we'd start with an anecdote of how I got pumped on water. Everyone should be pumped on water, I guess. Grew up kayaking, canoeing, doing all that fun stuff, but never knew where my water came from. When you turn on the tap at home, where did that drop of water start? When you flush all that fresh water in the toilet, where did it come from and where is it going? And it wasn't until someone told me this nondescript image of Disneyland Main Street. Nothing really jumps out at you. What should jump out is the water fountain right here. And it was when someone first told me that drinking water in Disneyland and in the greater LA area comes from the state of Colorado. I got out a map and I was like, all right, Colorado, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, California. That is really, really far. How and why does water go all that way from Colorado to Los Angeles? How does that make any sense? Is this feasible? Can we keep on doing this as a people? And that's really where I got kind of excited on figuring out where that water comes from. Now for the boring overview shot of the blue planet that we exist on. I don't do a very good David Attenborough, whatever the word is when you try to pretend to be someone. But you've seen 101 different documentaries talking about the crises of water, of our oceans, and the plights of that space. This is just our big, broad reminder that the vast majority of water that we talk about today is going to be in this itty bitty green little circle right here. Usable water in the form of groundwater and surface water. To expand on that a little bit more, this set of graphs really opens up our images so we can see that massive amount of saline or salty water that's not super easy for us to use in a variety of capacities. Other water that's difficult to use are in glaciers and ice caps, and we'd kind of like to keep that water in that form. Groundwater is going to be the majority of water that we have available to us, but it's going to be difficult to see as we're going through this Google Earth. So I need us to keep our 3D glasses on, our X-ray vision glasses, and imagining that these water systems go far beneath the lakes and rivers and pretty pictures that we're going to see. And this is our other little representation to help with those 3D glasses, recognizing words like aquifers and permeable rocks, that it's not necessarily this big cave super far underground or massive Olympic-sized swimming pools that we're drawing water out of, but permeable rocks, saturated soil, and different elements like that. So we'll be looking at the top, but knowing that there's a lot going on underneath the surface. And we'll move pretty quick through all these slides. Ambitious as always. This is our overview, and this is that 1,000 miles from LA all the way to the headwaters of the Colorado River. Wild. But all these different colors that I have going on here represent natural or artificial waterways. The only natural one that I have on here is the red, the Colorado River, which is why I chose red, which goes from Colorado to Baja California? Not anymore. Not since 1998 has the Colorado River actually flowed out into the ocean. But apart from that, we've got the green Colorado Aqueduct, an aqueduct being an artificial river, a series of pipes and canals that is man-made and brings water over to Disneyland. The LA Aqueduct bringing water from the Eastern Sierras down. The California State Water Project, or the Edmund G. Brown California Aqueduct in blue, and finally the Hetch Hetchy Aqueduct, just because it's interesting. Should aqueducts exist? I'm not here to grind a political axe or anything, but this is an image of more natural watersheds, which are created by usually elevation, mountains, or lack of mountains. The Sierra Nevada and the Rocky Mountains dictate which direction waters flow and where water stays as one singular system. And we can see, if we imagine that Colorado River starting up here, that we're crossing through multiple watersheds with a lot of our system. The Eastern Sierra, bringing water from different watersheds to where we need it. And again, kind of playing human engineer with saying mountains. Who really cares about mountains? We're not too worried about those. So our first drop of water we're going to follow is that follows the Sierra Nevada. And the Sierra Nevada is going to lead into the California Aqueduct or the LA Aqueduct. This picture, again, is just another way of representing those watersheds. Water, rain, precipitation, snow falls on these divides in the forms of the Sierra Nevada, the Rocky Mountains, and flows into a distinct watershed. Let's call this that San Joaquin, the Basin, and then the Colorado. With man-made elements and development, those watersheds will all artificially get rerouted back to a singular confluence, which is the greater LA area in this situation. And a lot of this is all dictated by annual precipitation as an element alongside those different elevations. And we can think of where all the people are is not necessarily where all the green or blue water is going on, and how that might be problematic a little bit more long-term. We should have all settled in Mississippi or wherever this is, have water all the time. And this is one more cool overlay of just seeing all the different tributaries that make up rivers, tributaries, different elements that make up those watersheds. It's not just one big river, but it's hundreds and hundreds of them. So enough of that. Let's see what it actually looks like in person, ground floor, as we zoom into Lake Tahoe, which is stunningly beautiful if and when this photo loads. This is an area on the southwest side of Lake Tahoe called the Desolation Wilderness, and one of my favorite backpacking spots in all of California, if not the US. I haven't done that much US, or whatever, all of California. Lake Tahoe is that watershed that we really learned about in school. Rain, snow falls down, evaporates, melts from precipitation, goes into a single river in this situation. 86 different tributaries feed in, but it only goes out as one Truckee River, and then leads down rivers to eventually a lake or eventually to the ocean. But it's that water cycle we kind of learned about in school, right? This image right here: evaporation, transportation, precipitation, percolation, all the Asians that we learned to think of like, water kind of stays around in 100% the same amount, but just as it moves around, which is not really the case. There's not a canal on this watershed cycle, or this picture doesn't go 1,000 miles south, which then would raise some other questions. So Lake Tahoe, being our perfect little drop of water, fell into the lake. As we keep on going, eventually that water from the Truckee would run into a lake like this, a reservoir like this. What the heck is the difference between these two bodies of water, a lake versus a reservoir? And I already kind of gave it away, but all these red dots on this map represent, I gave it away, reservoirs, and more importantly, dams as well. And in this situation, we're going to count a dam that's anything bigger than 3 feet tall. Definitely not the Hoover Dam. 3 feet, that's not that big. But if you're a fish, if you're a plant that likes to live on the shores of a river, 3 feet of barrier across manipulating, changing a waterway is definitely going to be enough to throw off your spawning. We're definitely going to be enough to change that environment that you live in. So these are all dams and reservoirs, over 1,200 dams, and over 1,200 reservoirs in California. Crazy amount that we think of when we typically think of dams as Castaic Lake, that's a reservoir, Hoover Dam, Lake Mead, these big massive ones. Not the case at all. To make it more convoluted, dam ownership is split up between a bunch of different agencies: federal, state, local. Water rights as a topic is super in-depth, super convoluted and confusing, but key and crucial to the way that California has developed in the capacity that it has today. Another element of supplying or storing water in California is not only storing water for drinking, usable, potable water, but also storing water is really the best, kind of only way that we can store energy right now. It sounds really stupid when you say it out loud. Batteries exist, but for the most part, massive like power plants or things that generate energy don't have a way of saving it super duper efficiently. We don't need all this electricity until the air conditions come on in the summer. We'll just store it for when we need it later. Solar doesn't have a good storage method. Water supplies represent one way of storing energy. Later on, we can use those water supplies for hydroelectric energy or other methods that turn water into steam. We're kind of old school like that. In a lot of ways, when we need to make energy and we have water, let's make it into steam like we've been doing for hundreds of years. But Lake Aloha, which is just outside of Tahoe, is one more example of a reservoir. That was an artificial, not naturally occurring lake, or if it was a lake, it wasn't as big. California and the US in general fell in love with building dams and reservoirs, and there were over 84,000 dams in the US. 1,000 was a lot in California. 84K across the US, massive, massive, massive. We loved it, it made sense, and it's let us develop as a country in the capacity that we are today. And here's a hot button one, and this might be what we think of or visualize when we hear the word dam. A big old arch structured dam like at Hetch Hetchy. Hetch Hetchy might trigger some memories too, as it was one of those kind of hot topic dams that was widely contested because it dammed an area in Yosemite National Park. If you kind of tilt your head or imagine there wasn't water here, this does 100% look like the same topography of Yosemite Valley. Little half dome, a little mini El Cap, but all of a sudden it's flooded for water storage for the entire Bay Area. That's usable drinking water and that's hydroelectric power. Folks like John Muir fought super valiantly against this dam as it has manipulated or changed the entire environment of this area. There's John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt. There are 101 different types of dams, and all these stories of dams that I'm sharing thus far are definitely colonial American, relatively new stories. Dams, artificial agriculture or irrigation methods have existed ancient Mesopotamia, 2,000 years ago. Indigenous folks were manipulating waterways. So this isn't a new phenomenon or something that white folks have developed or came up with. Existed for thousands and thousands of years. But different types of dams will do different things. And again, this is not to say not to say dams are inherently bad or inherently good, but that they are an ecological trade-off that's going on. Displaced people, flooded cultures, homes, habitats, greenhouse gases are countered by recreation opportunities, hydroelectricity, stored water supply for use. So this is up to you to continue to read about the pros and cons of dams and the history that's been so ingrained with the US. And it's a history that we're not over. There's actually a dam that I believe has been approved to be built near San Jose, California, in the form of a reservoir. So 2021, we're still cranking these up. We're still building them in place. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, I am not smart enough to say. But back to our typical little water drop. We forgot him for a while. He got stuck behind a dam. But eventually, with dam or without dam, the water would flow into a natural river or artificial. But a natural example is the Merced River, which flows through Yosemite Valley. And this is one time I am going to take a shot at rivers because they get a little too much credit sometimes for building, shaping, sculpting the landscape that we know. A big one is the Grand Canyon, with some myths perpetuated that it was only the Colorado that carved and cut and wove its way through the Grand Canyon. There's actually a whole bunch of different geologic forces, and a whole bunch of other variables that shape the landscape. 50 million years ago, this is probably what Yosemite Valley would have looked like. Not a whole lot going on 50 million years ago, but we still have that river winding its way through the small valley. 10 million years ago, all of a sudden we see more uplifting, tectonic plate movement, and erosion causing just the hard granite to stick around. More and more of that happens with more erosion, more tectonic plates, more uplifting and movement. So we know it's not just that river that's carving super duper hard or super duper fast. Eventually, a lot more relative in the scheme of things, we have ice ages that hit and just double down with glacial erosion or other ice moving things around. 10,000 years ago, we have a lake in Yosemite. So we know water's always been a factor, but maybe not the only or the primary factor to causing some of the locations we know and love to look like what they do. Not knocking rivers, just one of many different elements going on over the course of 50 million years. Eventually, the Merced River, the Stanislaus River, the San Joaquin River are all flowing into the Central Valley. And hypothetically, if we follow along with our watershed model, we're getting to the ocean at some point. California is really cool because we have a naturally occurring California Delta, which was supernatural until 1850, when there were a lot of reclamation, swamps, and marshland projects moving, diverting, changing how that delta looks by physically developing it up. So even areas like that, when water might be super close relative to getting out to the bay and completing its typical water cycle, we've got different places going on too. California Delta is amazing for agriculture, for shipping, for the economy, for recreation opportunities, a really cool, unique spot that not a ton of people get to go see. But that being said, it's not super scenic. So I don't know if I recommend it if it's like maybe not the destination. Water gets to the Delta, it's almost out to the ocean. It's almost made it. Not quite. The California Aqueduct was finished, completed in 1963, and was a method of bringing water all the way to LA from Northern California. So we have all those different sources that are feeding into the Delta, and then the California Aqueduct drawing from that same region or area, pumping water down, not just for Los Angeles use, but for all these farms, all this green farmland in between here. Kern County is actually one of the larger consumers of that water, taking over 30% of the water in the California Aqueduct for growing food. Super important as it works. And that California Aqueduct, not from up in a super high helicopter, is kind of pretty. I'm kind of into it in a weird artificial way. See if we can load this a little bit better. In a weird artificial way, the aqueduct changes from 12 to 85 feet wide in different places. It averages being 30 feet deep. And it's just this weird winding, big, not a sewer, an aqueduct, a channel that runs kind of the length of Highway 5. So you'll jump over it a couple different times if you're traveling up the 5 on your next road trip to the Delta. And eventually, the California Aqueduct ends up in Castaic Lake. But that's not to say all its water ends up at that specific terminus. There's actually 3 different branches of the California Aqueduct. The coastal branch zips out to San Luis Obispo, which has developed beyond its water capacity or naturally occurring water capacity. More zips out to Palmdale and all the way to Lake Paris. I need to drag my line a little longer. With the west branch, east branch, west branch, ending up in Castaic Lake, which we've driven past on the 5, which has really cool boating opportunities if you've never been out to Castaic Lake. A really cool, relatively local spot for us LA folks as we go in here. But this is drinking usable water and a reservoir on top of being a recreation area. And a really good arch or maybe embankment dam. I don't actually know, but I should know. That was drop of water number 1. That drop of water's journey is not done, but in Castaic Lake, it's going to meet up with some other friends from the LA Aqueduct. The Eastern Sierras is absolutely beautiful. And I highly recommend the 395 as a road trip to anyone and everyone. But the Eastern Sierras is a lot different from the west side of the Sierra where we were, in that it's in part due to the orographic effect or orographic precipitation, in which prevailing winds bring water, clouds, water vapor up high over a mountain. That water precipitates or rains, leaving a dry rain shadow on the other side of it. So all these images that we're going to see of the Eastern Sierra paint a drastically different picture than the west side. And here we are from the top of Mount Whitney, 14,500 feet up. This does not look like Lake Tahoe, a little tiny bit different. Lake Tahoe would be over in this direction, a little more north. That's not helpful at all. But we're going to be focusing on east of the Eastern Sierras, down into the Owens Valley, because we can see, all right, some water exists out over here. We got rivers going down. I've got lake, snow. If I am an LA superintendent of a water board, I am very interested in all this naturally occurring water. And it doesn't look like there's any really big cities right up here. So let's explore a little bit more as we pop into Mono Lake, which is a large lake coming out the opposite side. You can drive to Yosemite from this side of the Eastern Sierras. But Mono Lake is a massive, super salty saline lake, because less naturally occurring or flowing water is moving into and out of this lake due to some human development that's going on. This is a really cool picture of the mountains flowing here. But that human development that happened was what we alluded to a little while ago. Los Angeles seeing the relatively underdeveloped or less developed area of the Eastern Sierra, seeing all that natural snowpack that, despite being on the wind shadow of orographic precipitation, lots of snow to be had and hung out with. So they were going to start to pull from the Owens River and this whole Owens Valley watershed. I think the Owens River is a phenomenally cool looking river. It's relatively shallow. It's pretty darn narrow, and it just crisscrosses its way once upon a time all the way down to Owens Lake, which in this picture looks very much like a lake, but we're going to see that's not the case at all. Because in 1913, not whatever the heck number this is, 19,013, in 1913, William Mulholland was the superintendent for some LA water something or other. LA was running out of water, didn't have enough to continue developing at the current rate that it was. And through a series of political moves, some of which kind of might have been shady, William Mulholland kind of acquired a lot of water rights to this area from local inhabitants, from indigenous peoples, and is now trucking in or piping water all the way out. So this Owens Lake that we have right here, Owens Lake that we have and could see in that shot was definitely not a lake from this satellite view. And now all of a sudden we see white, we see greens in here. Not a lot of blue, not a lot of boating going on, because so much water has been pumped out of this region and the environment naturally changed, or not naturally, inherently changed, and maybe even irreversibly changed. Now we have these kind of desert pools that exist. We have massive, terrible dust storms that come up. So LA has to sprinkler or irrigate different places to mitigate dust storms. And the entire region has just become a little bit more desert-like due to taking water away from a specific region. From the Owens Lake, we would dump right back into Castaic, but we've got one more body of water to explore real quick, and that is the Colorado River. Starting north of Denver is where the headwaters are for that Colorado River. The Colorado used to be a natural red river that was very seasonal. As snow melted, let's see if okay, good, we're all down. As snow melted, the river level would rise a whole bunch during different seasons. It was called the Colorado because it was red with all the silt and deposit that was being carried. Today, the Colorado is not super duper red. It is not a super duper seasonal river due to in part by the mighty Colorado being tamed at a whole bunch of different places. Being one of the largest watersheds and specifically waterways in the region, it became a popular place to draw water from simply because it was there. More and more dams like the Glen Canyon Dam were put into place to create reservoirs. Lake Powell, I think is on the other side of this. Someone check me. Lake Powell being a reservoir that states like Colorado, Nevada, Arizona are drawing water from. And this has some effect on what we view as naturally occurring places. Even this shot of the Grand Canyon, which was once helped carved by the Colorado. We know it wasn't the only factor influencing it, but the Grand Canyon is now home to a different river that flows through it. Again, historically, the Colorado, seasonal, would come and go. Nothing was stopping it or pooling it up. And it was carrying all this silt, sediment, and debris. One gentleman that explored was a Civil War soldier and geologist, John Wesley Powell, who actually lost his arm in the Civil War, which made for really cool stamps. Oh, there's not enough pixels in this, but John Wesley Powell and a handful of explorers went down in wooden boats and navigated the entire length of the Colorado River, I believe all the way through, but he had nothing but terrible things to say about the Grand Canyon. A granite prison, desolate, no one will ever visit this area because it was probably hot, there weren't a lot of McDonald's or gas stations around. So interesting how our perception of monuments or outdoor spaces changes over time as well, because now the Grand Canyon is pride of the US. And another piece of pride and monuments is that of the Hoover Dam, built in 1931, completed in 35. The Hoover Dam makes up the largest reservoir in the United States, with Lake Mead being over here and then reaching all the way over here too. But the Hoover Dam is a massive public works project to create hydroelectric energy, to create water storage, and also to create a lot of jobs at the time of this Great Depression era. The Hoover Dam is an incredible place for recreation now. There are a lot of tours where you can go inside the dam and see the inner workings as this big example of how dams work. From the backside, we have different inlet towers, and we have, oh, we can't see the spillway from here, but we can from here. We have different ways or kind of images into the dams. Number one, how they were built. Two, how they function now, where we had to redirect rivers around different spaces in this very specific narrow canyon before this massive dam can be built. And we're also noticing that it kind of is like a pyramid in its own way, being way thicker down at the bottom to prevent all that pressure that's building up low, and pretty darn narrow at the top. It's just about a 2-lane road going across the top of it, and well worth the stop. There are some old pictures too showing where those spillways were if something were to go wrong. Inlet intake towers for hydroelectricity that's getting built up. Super cool just to Google or YouTube the Hoover Dam. Historic photos will come up, ways that it works and how-tos will come up. Super neat. But about 50 miles, 60 miles, I don't actually know, somewhere south of the Hoover Dam, there is the Colorado Aqueduct forms and shoots water back out to LA. We've only got a few more stops because we're almost there, but here we are in Los Angeles. I gave it away actually. If we're from LA, we may recognize this big long water slide and some of these different channels and canals, because this is Highway 5 running right up next to it that we have here. And this is all imported water coming from different places, imported in. And imported water makes up 62% roughly of the water that the greater Southern California area is using. Again, the State Water Project, local supplies, and LA Aqueduct, That is a generous definition of local. And Colorado River and aqueduct supplies, as well as water banking, which I didn't talk about, but water banking is recharging groundwater. Left that hanging for 30 minutes. Recharging groundwater storages by allowing water to percolate back into it. And eventually from there, all this stuff flows into everyone's favorite backyard attraction, the LA River, which if we're not from the LA area, we've seen in Terminator, random LA River tributary, or Grease, I think. I don't actually know. But the LA River from its farthest is a 54-mile stretch stretching from Canoga Park, San Fernando Valley, all the way down, exiting in Long Beach. And for all intents and purposes, it is a flood control channel, kind of a big sewer. It's a navigable waterway, and that you can kayak or canoe the whole thing, not legally, but for the most part, it is legally, it is a flood control channel. The city of Los Angeles was developing way too fast, paving paradise, putting up a parking lot, and all of a sudden rainfall that would happen in the greater LA area didn't have the same places to go. It couldn't percolate into groundwater. It couldn't flow to the ocean as easily in the form of natural rivers, which the LA River definitely was a natural river at one point. So the LA Army Corps of Engineers was called in to concretize, no, that's not a word, channelize the entire LA River, making it specifically a way for rainwater, floodwater to go from rain clouds to the ocean as quick as possible to prevent flooding in other areas. And that is still the primary purpose of the LA River. Unfortunately, get fresh water out as quick as possible. Lucky for us, there were a couple areas of the LA River that had too much upwelling or water coming up from the surface that the Army Corps of Engineers couldn't physically channelize. I'm gonna keep saying that word even if it's not one. Couldn't physically channelize the entire area. And while they still have the ability to come in and clear cut all this vegetation, there are some really cool spots of the LA River that are even open for kayaking. And the water is hypothetically a big old sewer, but there's also different filtration plants along the way. So this is not strictly dog poop that you're paddling in. There are a handful of water filtration plants that are reclaiming this water to be used for watering lawns, golf courses, unfortunately, in 101 different uses. I've swam in the LA River, I've guided for 3 years, and I still only have 2 arms, no 6th digit popping out. So it's an interesting look at a different place of LA that not a lot of folks can see. And finally, this all ends up at our exit spot. All 3 of those little drops of water are ending up in Long Beach in this situation. Crazy to think about. But those drops of water may go into desalination plants over here where we're pulling salt from water. They may go into different areas of LA reservoirs that are, again, recharging those underground aquifers that they have going on. So the water of California is strange. It's heavily manipulated, artificial, but it's been that way so that we can develop and provide clean drinking water, usable water to everyone and at a very affordable cost. And California even is kind of pioneering the idea of water rights not being a legal right to use water, but the legal right, like a human right, to always have accessible, usable water. So California is continuing to pioneer progressive strategies towards how we manage water today, how we'll manage water in the future, and how we'll keep water available for everyone to use. So I am 5 minutes over my time, which I apologize for. I appreciate you hanging out for the whole time and putting up with my quick talking. If you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the Q&A section. I am far from a water expert, just a nerd that thinks he knows something about it, but happy to answer those. Otherwise, we have we only have 2 more virtual tours coming up for this spring. Number 1, we'll be going to the national parks of Alaska. And next Thursday, we will be going to ghost towns of California, which I'm super excited for. But thank you for joining us. Appreciate you spending some time. and I will get to these Q&A questions right here.